Officially, it was the Rogue River Valley Railway, but it wasn't always fast, not always on time, and the locomotive was so very tiny. Locals smiled and made fun of it with a bunch of nicknames. To them, it was the Toonerville Trolley, the Jerkwater, the Rogue River Fast Mail, and the Tea Kettle. Oh, there were a lot of fun stories. Just ask Charlie Nickel, Judge Prim, or that baseball nut, George Newber. Here they are, drinking again at the card table.
Oh, looks like we got an interruption to our card game here, fellas. Good evening. I'm Charlie Nickel, former editor of the Democratic Times. We were reminiscing sitting here playing cards and thinking about the old Jacksonville Railroad, the Jacksonville Cannonball. I'm here with my card-playing buddies, my father-in-law, the Right Honorable Judge Prim, and my good friend here, George. He goes by Bum Newber. He's a baseball coach. We're all permanent residents up here on the hill. We have these basement units with a view. Anyway, you know, when that whistle is just right, sometimes I think I hear that old Jacksonville Cannonball just rumbling into town still.
Yes, Charlie. The story of how Jacksonville finally got its railroad is quite a tale. In fact, it was the folks from Jacksonville that stirred up the idea of a north-south railroad through Oregon. And all the while, they assumed that as the county seat and the largest city in southern Oregon, of course, the railroad would just have to go through Jacksonville.
Where did they ever get a surprise?
Excuse me, Bum.
What?
Construction started up in Portland, and by the time they got down to Roseburg, the rumor was starting that they were going to put the railroad straight through the middle of the empty Rogue Valley.
Yeah, that'd miss Jacksonville by 5 miles. Yeah.
Well, Charlie, it was a lot more than a rumor, because the railroad planners didn't see much opportunity for freight business from Jacksonville. Well, the facts are these. It was 1883, and I was a trustee for one of the leading citizens of Jacksonville, Cornelius Beekman, and his associates, who just happened to own land in the middle of the Rogue Valley, right where it did make sense to put the railroad. Well, the rail planners liked our idea, so we filed deeds that donated 20 acres to the railroad and set up 41 adjacent city blocks that soon became the city of Medford. Well, folks in Jacksonville were upset, but at least there was a railroad in the valley, not that far away.
Well, once the shock wore off, folks in town here thought that train was really vital to their survival. So they got together with the citizens over in Medford, and together they pledged $20,000 as a bonus if that line would be completed by January of 1890, I think.
Yeah. Oh, with that bonus on the line, things really started happening. They hired a surveyor and they ordered rails and all, and they started building depots. If you look just down the hill right here where the Chamber of Commerce building is, that's where the Jacksonville Depot used to be.
But by December, the rails still hadn't been delivered, and the construction crew walked off the job. Then, to everyone's surprise, the Portland rail supplier was awarded the entire contract. And suddenly, the rails were at hand.
Yeah. Well, once that equipment arrived, the next question was, what are we going to run on them? Jacksonville didn't have its own train yet, so it was decided to lease an engine from the Union Pacific. And boy, was it a humdinger, 25 tons. The problem was, it made those light rails that had been so hurriedly laid with no ballast look mighty questionable. Well, in true Jacksonville style, the night before the big event, we held a big ball and dinner at the U.S. Hotel. Then the next morning, to great hoopla and fanfare, that Union Pacific fired up its boiler. Folks, I got to tell you, this was the craziest thing you ever saw. It no sooner got up ahead of steam and left the depot than it busted through those rails. It took a right turn and drove straight into the ditch.
It did. Well, not to worry, though. With the bonus on the line, they still kept things going, and the leased engine they used, and on the morning of January the 16th, the Jacksonville Cannonball came rolling into town.
Well, looking forward to a rosy future, they incorporated as the Rogue River Valley Railroad Company. But they had to have their own engine to collect that bonus money. The city fathers were delighted that we had an operating railroad, so they extended the bonus deadline by another 6 months.
Well, finally we did get our own engine, and it was a humdinger. Brand spanking new and shiny as a new penny, called the tea kettle. The problem was it was too small and didn't have enough power to make that grade from Medford up to Jacksonville. So eventually we settled in using that Union Pacific and made our daily runs for between the two towns.
Yeah, well, we had regular rail service, but even more important, more fun for me at the newspaper was the entertainment. that incline coming up into Jacksonville, the local teenagers that go out there and they'd grease up those rails, and the train would come up the hill and the wheels would turn and the kids would wave and holler. And we never caught any of them, but they could run too fast. There was another time too. Somebody put a .44 caliber bullet on the rail, and danged if it didn't go off, nearly took my head off.
Oh, sure, Charlie. You and I were out fishing. You weren't even close.
Oh, my story sold newspapers.
You know, you boys, Josh, but I'll tell you, that train made life mighty convenient for everybody here in Jacksonville. In fact, I remember my old famous baseball team, the Jacksonville Gold Bricks.
Yeah.
We would use that train to go to many of our games, as well as our huge throngs of fans.
Huge.
Well, the railroad was never much of a moneymaker, and after a while they leased it to one of our local fellas, William S. Barnum. Boy, he was a character. And most of the time he was a one-man show.
He was.
Boys, I remember him. He was quite a spectacle.
Show him, Charlie.
You'd see Barnum once the train was ready to go. He'd climb out on the platform and he'd amble back and forth singing out, "All aboard! All aboard!" When the train was loaded, he'd jump up into the engine, fire up the boiler, set that throttle for about 4 miles an hour, and then leap back down onto the platform. As the train moved by, he would grab the end of it and climb up into the back of the passenger compartment. Then he'd go in the back door, saunter up the aisle, singing out, "Tickets, please, tickets, please." When all that was done, he'd go out the front door of the passenger car, climb over the tender, down into the engine compartment, and there he would be the engineer, fireman, and owner all at the same time.
That Barnum, what a character he was. But stuff was always happening. Remember that big curve coming into Medford?
Yeah.
The engine went smack dab into the ditch. And there was a whole bunch of ladies going shopping, and they were carrying their baskets in there, pulling up their skirts, walking down a dusty road. I got some pictures, and they weren't pretty.
Jacksonville Cannonball.
That Jacksonville Cannonball.
Well, by 1899 they'd had enough, and they sold the whole railroad to Barnum for $12,000. Boy, was that a shrewd buy. He later sold it again for $125,000.
But you know, the biggest surprise was yet to come, and that was called the automobile. And for the railroad, that meant it was pretty much the end of the line. Yeah. Well, old Billy Barnum, he bought the outfit back one more time, and try as hard as he could never make a go of it. And so I think it was around 1925 or so. He finally folded up shop, dismantled the whole operation, and walked away.
Well, folks, thanks for eavesdropping a little bit. That's the story of Jacksonville and its railroad, and also the town of Jacksonville. Oh, it kind of keeps reinventing itself from a gold boom town into a beautiful tourist place with restaurants and all kinds of stuff now. And if you go to the Bigham Knoll campus, you can see that little old engine perfectly restored down on that campus. So, well, thanks for visiting, folks.
I'll raise you 300.
All right.
300 what? You don't have 300. You don't have $300 to your name.
I'll raise you $200.
Oh, my. The local teenagers that go out there and they'd grease up those rails, and the train would come up the hill and the wheels would turn and the kids would wave and holler.